The more the world goes remote or hybrid, the more important it is to get people together in person strategically at its core. Like, we are still humans, and until we're all part robot, or until robots take over the world, like, we are going to have this innate desire to connect with others, and that is going to happen in person.
Welcome to Secret Ops, the podcast uncovering the world of operations, one episode at a time. I'm your host, Ariana Cofone, and today's guest is Jared Kleinert, the founder and CEO of Offsite, a company that helps businesses to plan team offsites. Now, operators, if you're like me, you have definitely been involved in offsites, if not planning the entire thing from end to end. And as much as I love an offsite, I also know how much hard work it is to put in the effort to make it really fantastic. Now, Jared, this is his expertise. Some other things that he has from his background: he's a TED speaker, a 3-time award-winning author, and he was also voted as USA Today's most connected millennial because he's helped organize hundreds of events for over 30,000 attendees. So big or small, he's experienced it, led it, facilitated it, given talks about it, and we're going to learn a lot from him today. So let's jump in. Jared, thank you so much for coming on to Secret Ops, especially because we get to talk about one of my favorite topics, offsites. What is an offsite? Why do we do offsites? Pro tips from the expert himself. So I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Before we dive into all of my really granular questions, because I'm going to nerd out, let's start with your journey into getting here today. So how did you find yourself founding a company and leading a company that just essentially does end-to-end of everything with an offsite? Talk us through it.
Like all great companies, it started during the big pandemic of 2020. Yeah, Offsite is a pandemic company for sure. About a year into the pandemic, started working on what became Offsite. I was sort of betting on a few different trends. The first is that I hypothesized most companies were going remote or hybrid. And I felt that way before the pandemic as well. I just think pandemic pushed us into the future 10 or 20 years. But I thought everyone was going remote or hybrid. As a byproduct of that, I believed every company would plan an exponential number of offsites. Offsites have been planned for decades now, even for office first companies. Kind of the word came from going off-site, away from your office, mostly reserved for like executive teams or maybe a sales team that outperformed and got a fancy trip out of it. And then the third bet I was making, or a realization, was that there was no software to make offsite planning easier. And from previous experience, I knew that planning offsite sucked. So it's like, yes, we should have software to make this easier. And that's typically a good way to start any software company, is if you can make something suck less, then it might be a good company. And so those were sort of the bets. The reason I came to think that those things would happen is because I had a decade of offsite related experiences before the pandemic happened. About 12 years ago, I was one of the earliest employees at a company called 15Five, which is one of the leaders in employee engagement and performance management software today. A few hundred people, distributed team, but they were remote first, like 12, 13 years ago. So I attended offsites as an employee at a company that used their own offsites to build their own award-winning culture. And then I had a 7-year run of being a speaker, author, consultant, where I was able to do some TED and TEDx talks. That led to a lot of corporate keynotes. So I was speaking at offsites. That led to facilitating executive team retreats in particular, because various marketing teams in the Fortune 1000 wanted to learn how to market to millennials. And
can I actually ask, having been a speaker and a facilitator in those settings, what would you say are the biggest differences and the biggest challenges in switching with those roles?
I think I was a good speaker, but I was probably more on the content side, which lends well to facilitation. Facilitation is mostly about the content and the outcomes of a meeting. Like, it doesn't matter how entertaining you are, other than to maybe get people out of their rut or get them to engage with each other, pay attention. But it's really about the outcomes in an executive team meeting and what you're actually benefiting as a result of bringing in a facilitator. So different skill sets, but sort of learned by a trial by fire. And so the last offsite experience I had before starting the company was I ran summits for entrepreneurs for about 4 years before the pandemic, bringing together like 20 to 40 people at a time for 3 days. Did that for almost 4 years. So I ran 14 of these meeting of the minds summits and basically planned an offsite end to end.
It seems like a common thread is human connection and communication for all of these experiences you have, because you've also written books as well, speaking, facilitating, now literally rethinking how to help others present and facilitate offsites. That seems to be just like a magnet for you. What do you think draws you to that? What do you think it is about, I guess, connection and communication that gets you, I don't know, into that world?
I think it was a chosen zone of genius and then something I invested in at a very early age. My zone of genius is bringing together people and ideas to accomplish bigger things for society. And the only way I even got to understanding what a zone of genius was, how to articulate it, what it might be for me, was working with the founder and CEO of 15Five. His name is David Hassel. And I was very fortunate to just cold email him when I was 16, offered to work unpaid in exchange for his mentorship. Ended up spending 2 years at this startup, which now is a client of ours. David's an investor in Offsite, and is really one of the origins for all my work now. But I guess I had some choice in the matter of emailing him, and then lots of hard work.
Definitely
listening to whatever advice I got, but.
I don't know a lot of 16-year-olds that would just cold email somebody and be like, yo, I'll work for free. Can you hook me into your world?
Yeah, I just sort of read about David after a negative mentor experience. The article was about him being the most connected man you don't know in Silicon Valley, meaning that he had all these connections to amazing athletes and individuals like Tim Ferriss and different startup founders. Those dinner parties, like people look up to him. But yeah, really it's just in the right place at the right time. Learned from David about the power and benefits of networking, community building, etc. And then decided to double down on that because I wasn't particularly interested in learning technical skills. Like maybe at 16, I could have learned how to become an engineer and coding and all that. But I was sort of betting that I would get farther by learning social skills than learning technical skills. Hopefully that's going to work too, because now we have ChatGPT that could code for you.
I feel like it's advantageous.
Yeah.
I think back in the day, I grew up with a lot of like my grandparents. So a lot of it was about human connection and talking over coffee and, like coffee cake. And it was very face to face. You had to learn how to talk to adults, to kids, to anybody. That was kind of how I grew up. Same with my husband. And now you sort of see generationally, there is that gap. Like there are some people that don't have those social skills in that way because we are so digital first. And that is quite interesting actually for thinking about offsites because you have a lot of people that are meeting and building relationships digitally, and then they're meeting for the first time in person. So I guess let's go into the trifecta because I think this is a perfect transition. So trifecta in operations, people, process, technology, fueled by data. When it comes to the people part of putting all of the pieces together for an offsite, I guess let's start with how do you bridge the gap in types of people and how they function, how they get engaged? Like, how do you even approach that?
You got to pick the right people to join. We do advise in thinking through maybe a cadence of offsites. So do you want to have an all hands meeting once a year, quarterly executive team retreats, maybe 2 to 4 department level offsites throughout the year? Sort of what structure are you putting around your program for offsites? And that's depending on how big your company is, if it's fully remote or if it's hybrid, like how distributed your team is, what sort of budget you can allocate or are willing to allocate. It's a lot of factors, but we can advise clients on that. But really, it's about all the facilitation points. So your job to get the right people in the room, our job to help make sure that interaction and those experiences are going to be as high ROI as possible and as engaging as possible.
But there is that need, like once they feel what's happening within those offsites, they want to know when the next one is. They want to understand the next time they can come together and have that sort of thinking process or facilitation. It's a little bit different than their day to day. Do you find that most people, when it comes to an offsite, gravitate towards wanting more? Do you have some people that tend to want to like do one time a year, 4 times a year? Like, what do you see in your world?
I would say most employees are opting for more offsites than less. And then companies are realizing the benefits of creating some structure around a program of offsites. A lot of our clients have been through a pretty tough downturn in the last year and a half, 2 years. So they're kind of also coming out of that and figuring out what they can and can't afford. But if there's the ability to invest in it, most companies are trying to have their employees be at a company offsite once a quarter, would be ideal. And that could be, again, like you attend an all hands meeting once a year. And then if you're on the sales team, you might do a sales kickoff in Q1. You might, hopefully you're a top performer and you get to go to a President's Club event in Q2. And then maybe there's like another like mid-year check-in. And then you have your all hands and, late Q3, early Q4. So you get to go to 4 offsites a year. This is something that Airbnb has rolled out, where Brian Chesky back in April 2022 was like, Airbnb is going to be fully remote now. And if you work here, here's some, 7 tenets of how we're going to do this. Subject to change, of course. But I think number 4 out of his tweet thread was that you'd be going to lots of offsites. And he sort of pegged this idea of once a quarter or more as a frequency for going to various offsites at the company. And then I also read recently the founder and CEO of Dropbox, Drew Houston or Houston. Houston is a very New York thing to say.
It was very New York.
But let's go with Houston. Give Texas some love.
Yeah.
Drew Houston / Houston has, I guess, this unofficial 90-10 rule where he says 90% of your time working at Dropbox should be remote and 10% should be at a company offsite. And so that equates to 20-something business days a year. If you sort of like take out weekends and holidays and then you sort of do the math, it's like, oh, that means you're probably at an offsite, once a quarter for 3 to 5 days at a time. So that's a magic wand scenario, is probably 3 to 5 days at a time, once a quarter. But it really depends on the makeup of your team and the size of your company as well. And so a company like 15Five today, a few hundred employees, they might have 20 to 30 offsites that they plan, but there's like one all hands a year, quarterly executive team meetings or like even board meetings.
Exactly.
And then you have product teams, engineering teams, marketing teams sort of doing their own thing. But hopefully, you're giving a playbook internally, giving tools so that people know what they can spend, what sessions they should be running. And no one does this particularly well. Not even the pioneers.
Yeah, talk to us about that. This is more the process part. What do you think people really get wrong about planning an offsite? And like you said, like how do you reorient their playbook based on best practices that you've learned over, the decade plus that you've been doing this?
Yeah, process. I think we're all just figuring it out on the spot and starting to come to some basic frameworks. There are some companies that do this really well. Some of the pioneers in the space that inspired Offsite were Automatic, which owns WordPress, and Tumblr, and a few other companies like that. They're now one of our corporate investors, which is cool as well. And so they have 1,200 to 1,500 employees now. And so they've built playbooks, but some of those playbooks have broken as they've scaled. But they do have a company wiki internally. And that company wiki will share policies around sort of what you can spend per day, per attendee, maybe some communications that you could send out around these offsites, and so on and so forth. So they do a really good job of that. GitLab is another example, pioneering remote first company. I believe they're the first fully remote company to go public. And they also have just a very extensive public company wiki on everything. including various offsite formats, and that has worked for them. I think you're not really doing all hands meetings at their size, but you're doing maybe regional meetups of a few hundred people at a time. So I think running doing a company wiki is probably a good idea for any remote or hybrid team in Notion or wherever. I'm sure you have other episodes on that.
I love a wiki. I adore a wiki.
Yeah.
Where do you end up taking that? Because like obviously you've got some companies that have best practices with offsites, what they do, how they do it. Let's say you lovingly get a client that you don't have that established framework, or maybe it's kind of a hot mess. How do you start to reframe what an offsite should be about? What's the spirit? What's the structure? Like how do you begin that process?
Yeah, even with the companies that have like internal wikis, I think there is an opportunity right now to educate people on what an offsite is, and an opportunity for us to put technology in place. Your third piece of this, to figure out over time what are better processes, and maybe like who are the right people, or how do you better have those folks interact with each other. And so we're now developing some data as we're working across hundreds of companies. And so we're starting to come across these frameworks like you will likely spend $2,000 to $3,000 per person per offsite. So when you're thinking about an annual planning framework and budgeting, we've now come to understand, like the 30 line items that, are going to take up 98% of offsites. Maybe there's like a straggler here or there that has a very unique line item in their budget that they need to add. But we have built templates, maybe we could put in the show notes of like, how to build a budget for this. And so, we're coming across some budgeting frameworks. We're coming across a framework of cadence, and then, sort of all the factors that would go into that. And then really trying to educate people on sort of why are you having an offsite in the first place? And so there are business objectives tied to certain offsites, like strategic planning. So you might have an executive team retreat once a quarter to do your quarterly planning, do a retro of the past quarter, go into the next quarter and find your OKRs. We're actually starting to build templates around certain operations playbooks, right? Like there's the scaling up methodology, there's entrepreneurial operating system. And some of those books have like basic offsite frameworks in them. And so we can actually go a step further, create templates around that, and then help clients like find the right place to do it, build out the entire agenda, take care of all the logistics, et cetera.
Which, like, I just want to note here, that is no easy task. It looks deceptively easy because, like, listen, the experience is you get to an offsite, everything's arranged. You have the hotel, you have your food, you have your agenda, you have your meeting room, you have your screen to present on, you have your deck, you have all of these things. You've got note cards, right? All of those little pieces have to be coordinated, defined. It's like, it's so crazy if you haven't planned one yourself, how much all of those details actually play in. Even welcome kits.
I have some fantastic people at my team.
I'm sure.
I do this for clients day in and day out. Like as we're recording this in early November, we have 3 offsites happening around the country right now this week, and barely knew which clients they were for or what's going on at the offsites, which is a great thing because then I could focus on
that means that something's going well.
The team crushes it, and we put processes in place on how to plan offsites for clients. We're starting to share more and more of that publicly as content marketing and thought leadership, but then also we have great engineers that are trying to turn that into software bit by bit. And so
talk to us about that, the technology piece that you're building out with the team.
Yeah. I mean, I envision a world where we can have this be fully automated or sort of create the Canva of the space where anyone can plan an offsite on their own and leverage all these best practices, just like you would use Canva to do some design work on your own. Or if you ultimately want to hire like an offsite planner through us or hire an event producer through our marketplace, then we're giving them all the tools to take care of you, just like designers will go into Canva and do work on behalf of a client. So there's a whole ecosystem of software we can build for this. The first piece of software we decided to build, which is unique to other competitors, is we decided to build a marketplace where you can find essentially every vendor that you need to plan an offsite. And the first vendor that we really focused on was your venue, which is typically a hotel,
Yes.
a resort,
Yes.
meeting space providers. We decided to start there because that was the hardest. That was one of the biggest friction points to get started, and one of the hardest parts of planning an offsite. And it dictates about 2/3 of your budget. And so we decided to focus on that. And when I was running,
that's a beast to focus on too.
yeah, I mean, when I was running Meeting of the Minds, I had this experience personally where I was trying to figure out where to bring clients, and I tried big Airbnbs, I tried photography studios, I tried hotels, I tried boutique mom and pop hotels, and I tried like Fairmont properties. And they all had different ways of working. Like the contracts were ridiculously challenging, and even if you wanted to book with them, like it was very painful to find the right contact through their website, and then to talk to their sales manager, and then a separate person for food and beverage. Like it's just a total mess. So we basically built Airbnb for offsite venues to start. We've partnered now with a few hundred hotels all around the world, and you can make an account at offsite.com. Then you could click into any of the profiles, check out all the pretty pictures and all the basic information like meeting space and the room sizes and number of restaurants, distance from airport. And then within 24 hours, we expect hotels to get back to you with a detailed proposal and with a 20% or more discount because you're booking through Offsite. So that's been really cool. And anyone can use it. It's getting better sort of week by week as our sprint cycles are happening. So just adding in every category over time, like photographers, videographers. We do all this for clients now. We're just sort of turning it into software. So we'll be on that train for a while because building software is hard, and building a marketplace is an entire business. It's like Airbnb, Thumbtack. They're all marketplaces. Those are gigantic businesses. I do think it's...
Well, and I was going to ask you,
yeah,
like, what do you think has been in that first stage? What do you think has been the hardest or the biggest learning curve in starting the marketplace feature of this?
Yeah, well, we had a bigger vision at the very beginning. And so I think one of the biggest lessons learned for company building and for building software is really to narrow scope and focus. I mean, the very originating story vision for Offsite was to sort of do the end all be all software platform, but to also have physical Offsite campuses all around the country. And so at one point, I was under contract for 20 acres of land in upstate New York and was going to basically build a hotel. And it was like meeting with general contractors and city officials in Bethel, which is like 2 hours outside of New York. That's where Woodstock took place. Fun fact. But thankfully, I got out of that lease and just focused on software. And then with software, we will ultimately build some offsite planning tools, which is where some of our competitors have decided to go. So I envision things like an agenda builder feature, like how can we can turn that into an algorithm, a budget builder feature, like we can help you build a budget based on what's in your agenda and where you're going and pull data. You don't need ChatGPT for this stuff. You just need to build a good old fashioned algorithm. But yeah, and then there's a few other features I can envision there, but it's easy as it sounds to say that that's an entire company as well. So we just decided to focus on the marketplace,
Absolutely.
Build that out. And then within the marketplace, there's a lot of things that have popped up that are surprisingly difficult. The main thing is the RFP process between a user and a hotel. And just there's so many different edge cases that can come up. For example, if you're planning a offsite for 100 people, but your executives want nicer rooms, and then you want your executive assistant or your chief of staff to show up a day or two early to sort of lay everything out. How do you automate different room types and different attendee counts in what should be an automated process back and forth? And so those edge cases propose a lot of interesting challenges. And then at some point would like to make this fully automated, like real-time pricing, real-time availability. But hotels have a very antiquated system around the different booking platforms they use. It's not like Expedia or some of those other travel providers where you can get real-time pricing and availability on individual rooms. Like once you go to 8 rooms or so on most of those platforms, it becomes a different type of booking rather than just like an individual room or multiple rooms. You're a room block, and then they're trying to sell you meeting space and food and beverage and AV. And so I do think at some point you can sort of fully automate this. So you can like go on a website, be able to book a 20-person room block with meeting space, with AV, get the price in real time, book it. That day is not today, but we're figuring out all the different reasons why that's not possible, and then trying to solve for that. And so that's pretty interesting. And then just getting data around like where people want to go, what types of places they want to go to, and starting to sort of build our supply around that has been super fascinating. So yeah, just endless lessons to learn.
Endless lessons. I think so. Operations tends to become a catch-all within businesses because oftentimes we're spanning across the business, right? So anytime that there is a larger company initiative, we tend to have our hand in it in some way, shape, and form, which is why I've gotten involved a lot in Offsites. Not necessarily because I want to, but because it's kind of de facto in that operations umbrella. And I'm just imagining operators listening to this thinking like, oh my God, I never want to research hotels again, or oh my God, I never want to research spaces again. This in itself, I guess what people don't understand in planning an offsite is the amount of time it takes to do all of these things.
Oh, you have an executive assistant, you have a chief of staff, head of people, head of ops listening to this, screaming in their car, like, yes, yeah, sorry about it, you're so right. Like, I just want to apologize on behalf of CEOs everywhere that that you have become the catch-all for offsite planning. I would not be surprised at all if this became a full-time role at various companies in the future. I've seen a couple like head of remotes and sort of roles around that. But I would not be surprised whatsoever if there was a dedicated offsite planner internally. And some of the corporates that we try to sell into, I've seen like a head of events or an internal events team. But I would argue that even the kind of events they used to plan or plan now are fundamentally different than an offsite, especially if you're fully remote, hybrid, or very distributed. And so, yeah, I'm sorry, but I'm working to make it easier for you.
Well, this is also when we were talking about the cadence, annual versus quarterly versus, all team versus, individual teams. What inevitably happens that I have found is then people are like, I love seeing everybody face to face. When's our next meetup? When's our next hangout? And then all of a sudden we're like now doing social gatherings, and like me as an operator, like I just want to automate things and like make people's lives easier. I don't want to be planning events. And I do think you're right, because as resource has been taken off of rent, being in office, that can be allocated now towards different roles. Like you talked about, having someone that just oversees offsites or just oversees these more social components of work that are very important for employee retention, for communication, for alignment. Like it might seem frivolous, at surface level, but it's actually not.
I feel like you were in the pitch meetings with me when I was talking to VCs about why offsite should exist.
Yeah. It's because, I've seen it though. And maybe, you can speak to this too. I have been in a room where nobody has seen each other face to face ever. And they've been working together for a year, 2 years. And you inevitably have that moment that's like, I thought you were taller. I thought you were shorter, like, oh my gosh, like, and then all of a sudden you start to see a bond happening that you can't almost verbalize what's going on, but it happens in all the cues and the body language and the humor and the jokes and all the in-between moments that you don't have necessarily baked into a virtual environment. And that's where maybe I'd like to go behind the scenes, talking a little bit about like, what people don't know. And I think part of this is virtual versus in-person. The work that you're doing, obviously you're building this marketplace to help make this easier, more virtual, more digital. But the offsites that you're planning are in person. Why do you think being in person for these is so important?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the why you would plan an offsite. And so we kind of touched on strategic planning, which is very in line with what a lot of ops folks will have a hand in sort of rhythm of business conversations. There's team building, which is sort of a phrase thrown around, but that is an important reason for having offsites as well. There's increasing cross-department collaboration. There's employee retention, there's employee alignment, there's sort of innovation and brainstorming, which might be really good for marketing teams or even like engineering and product teams. There's there's like client-facing events where you might want to do a multi-day event for VIPs that you work with, or customer conferences. So there's all these different reasons to have an offsite. And most of those things are just better to be done in person versus virtual. Like that's kind of the answer at the end of the day. That's at its core. Like we are still humans, and until we're all part robot, or until robots take over the world, like we are going to have this innate desire to connect with others, and that is going to happen in person. And actually, I think you and I would agree. Like the more the world goes remote or hybrid, the more important it is to get people together in person. Absolutely. Strategically. And so I believe there's so many benefits to remote work at the individual lifestyle standpoint for employees, and sort of access to opportunities for employers. It's access to talent around the world. There's productivity benefits if you're doing it right. Forces you to communicate better as a leader, to build a company wiki and like get people on the same page. But there are challenges to running a remote or hybrid company because it's really just around managerial challenges. Like managing people's hard, managing teams are hard.
So hard.
All the problems that make it hard are just harder in a remote or hybrid setting because we're all still figuring out how to do that. And even the pioneering ones in the space have only done it for 10, 15, 20 years, relative to like thousands of years of in-person work. So virtual events have their place. Like we do maybe a quarterly happy hour sort of thing. But the why behind that might be to celebrate a new employee being added to the team, or it might be to give everyone a break if we've all been working so hard. Those are the sort of the lower barrier of why to have a virtual event. But for the important company building, foundational elements of your culture, those are all going to drive to in-person experiences. And if not, then you either should just have a culture where it's very clearly outlined that this is async. We never have email, or we never have meetings. We do this in a certain way, and it's very transactional, but some people like that and could be very highly productive. And then, that's going to be 2% of companies. So then 98% of companies are going to be, with humans and people that want to see each other, that may otherwise feel lonely at home if they don't get to see colleagues or have human interaction. They want to benefit from their own ways of working, being able to access opportunity around the world, all the benefits, but like they also crave that human connection. And if you don't give it to them for long enough, like they're one click away from starting to look for another job. And that's going to get more expensive to replace folks and train them up versus investing in offsites where, at minimum you can retain top talent for another 6 months, a year, because they have like a fun trip to Miami to look forward to in the winter. Or, you can actually build upon those connections and like during the harder moments when they're feeling lonely or something's happening at home that they need to vent about, like they can message a trusted colleague, like feel a kinship with someone else, hop on video, and it's a much better experience because there's more trust, there's more intimacy.
A point I wanted to touch base on, because you're talking about it helps with teamwork and collaboration and communication and all of these things that I cannot stress are insanely important. But the problem that I have found is, how do you quantify a return on investment for this type of offsite? And this is where, especially a lot of the times when I'm working with small to mid-sized businesses, they might not have had an offsite ever yet, right? Like a lot of them have been founded in the last couple of years. After 2020, this is still a virtual land. So how do you and your team approach talking about the return on investment? Like how do you quantify those things that almost feel unquantifiable?
I think the cut and dry way to do it, if you've never done it before, would be to look at what you previously spent on office space, in-office lunches or snacks and all the associated costs, and then think about reinvesting it into a cadence of offsites. And what you'll find is you are likely saving money by planning offsites versus what you used to pay sort of per head to have an office. You know, it's like some companies, like it wouldn't be unreasonable to be spending $500 to $1,000 per person on office space every month. When you consider rent, you consider furniture, you consider utilities, all that.
It's so costly.
Yeah.
It's so
Plus
costly.
lunches, snacks.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
The happy hours events you might have done. So you're spending, in the before times, you're probably spending $10,000 to $20,000 per person annually on office related expenses. And now you have a world where you can spend $2,000 to $3,000 per person per offsite. And even if they go to the quarterly offsite, like maybe you're investing, $8,000 a year per employee, you're pocketing 15-20% of what you were spending otherwise, while having this amazing perk to leverage in recruiting, which has a positive ROI. If you want to calculate that, you're getting better team members. You're getting people that maybe you've been able to localize what you're paying them. Whether or not that's a good practice is like another person's episode and expertise. But there's probably
we'll
other
get people ops in here. Don't worry.
Yeah, there's probably other savings to be had there. And then that's just brass tacks. Like then we could start talking about all the things that are a little harder to measure, but things like an employer net promoter score, and is that increasing over time? That is something you can track by doing surveys. And we recommend our clients do that before an offsite and then after an offsite. And then if they have a cadence of offsites, they can sort of do it regularly and see over time if their employer net promoter score is going up. We also recommend various like connectedness to colleagues scores and like connectedness to company scores. And I'm sure you have your own employee metrics that you can bake into this. You can use tools like 15Five or Lattice or Cultramp and layer this in. But that can start giving you a set of data over time to think about the ROI of offsites as well. Then you get to some of the sort of higher end stuff, like how do you measure trust and intimacy and like whether that goes up or not. There's like sentiment analysis tools that Slack has. And so I haven't played around with it too much, but we use a thing called Geekbot for like daily asynchronous check-ins. And I know that they have like they have the ability to read Slack messages and give you like emojis on like how happy or sad or normal your team is. And so I know that like very there are some sentiment analysis things you can utilize. I'm sure other softwares have layered onto that. And so there's also like, you can see how many messages were sent like 2 months before an offsite and then 2 months afterwards. I'm sure there's ways to see like collective meeting minutes in Zoom or Huddle, like a Slack Huddle, or there's like a new company called Roam that, you can sort of check all that data out in. And so I think over time, like you can track those sort of things as well. And then like if, people trust each other more, like it's probably going to be palpable and visible. If everyone's more aligned on company culture, that's going to be apparent. And hopefully you'll hit your KPIs. It's hard to know if you would have like better OKRs from an in-person executive team retreat versus a virtual executive team retreat. But I think most of us would probably bet that you'll get better debate and discourse and, understanding from an in-person offsite. And like
what I've seen with virtual OKRs, like deciding on virtual OKRs versus in-person OKRs, is that the OKRs become editable a lot more frequently.
Really?
Versus when you set up OKRs in person. I found there to be pretty hot discussion about them, right? Because you have a bunch of experts coming in with their expertise saying, no, I think this is what it should be. And you hash out a lot of those things that maybe virtually doesn't really work. So then what happens is the next quarter, they're shifted a little bit, then they're shifted again. And then everybody's kind of like, what are we aiming towards here? Like, I'm confused. What are we going towards? But that's like a small kind of case study with the clients that I've been working with.
Yeah. You could even think about the like why connect virtually versus in person at all. Like virtual connections have a lot of benefit for saving time and money. Like we didn't have to record this in person and each take time out of our day to travel and commute and money to do that. Same with a salesperson hopping on a call or on Zoom. Like they don't have to travel like my grandfather did, all around the country to do like wholesale jewelry, shout out grandpa.
Isn't that crazy to think about?
Yeah.
I just think about encyclopedias that used to come door to door and, sell we had one of those, but like, it's just so much has changed so quickly.
But then what are the benefits of in person? It's like,
exactly.
It's being able to humanize someone that leads to building trust. Even one interaction with a client in person today can endear you for 6 to 12 months. And that's true of a team member as well. Like it's very refreshing for me to engage with my employees whenever I get to see them. And like, I will go out of my way to go meet new employees in person. And, we plan offsites quarterly. And it's for no other reason than just, build a deep, meaningful relationship. So that you can do all the tactical stuff later on virtually asynchronous. I would say the other main reason is like if you're having a difficult conversation, like you're probably going to want to do that in person. Like if you're breaking up with someone, you should probably do that in person versus on a call. Or like your doctor is going to tell you some news in person, better or worse. And like, ideally, if not, they'll call. Like the last thing they're going to do is text you or email you. Like that's the worst. Because you can't pick up on body language, voice indentations, all the things that lead to, deep connections. And so if that all happens in person, like the same is going to be true at a company. Like if you're having, challenging decisions at the board level or, at a leadership level about what your OKR should be for the next quarter or like what your plan should be for the next year, you're probably going to have to get out in person and, ultimately come to an agreement on what's best for the company. And that's just more efficient in person and will lead to less editable OKRs that people will follow. Yeah.
Can you tell that drives me just slightly crazy?
Yeah.
I guess last question in this section before we do a little wrap up is if the operators are listening and they're like, Jared, I'm always planning these damn things and I just don't know. I don't want to anymore. What would you say is the greatest pro tip of offsite planning that you can give them outside of just working with you all?
Yeah, I was going to say, go to offsite.com.
Yeah, just go. What would you say is something that they should just kind of put in their back pocket when they're at that stage that they've got to plan the offsite? It's on their plate. What's a pro tip to give them?
I would try and templatize this as much as possible. And you think of it as sort of building blocks. Like you're going to need certain capabilities in a hotel or in a venue. And so you can come to understand what that is going to be for your company or for the certain types of offsites that you're planning. And then you can sort of programmatically ask for that with venues. And so you'll come to know that you need a certain number of rooms in your room block. You're going to need a certain number of nights. You're going to need one big meeting space and then 3 breakout rooms and this basic AV package. And then you can just sort of like keep that as a template. And then that makes it easy to go message various venues. I would recommend, as another pro tip, negotiating and planning ahead.
Definitely.
Those 2 separate pro tips. But planning ahead will help you.
Get 3 for the price of 1.
Yeah, planning ahead will help you with negotiating because you may not have dates locked in or even a city locked in. And then you could message various venues and have them give you the best rates possible on their calendar. You could also pin hotels and venues against each other and ultimately save more money. And so if you have that template, it'll just make that back and forth a lot easier and help you plan ahead because you know exactly what you need. Same with an agenda. Not that you're going to have the same agenda every single time, but you're going to have some travel in and travel out time. And so those are building blocks you can replicate and adjust based on how far people have to travel. you're going to have probably some sort of welcome dinner or welcome activity. You're going to have your morning set up. We recommend like an optional workout in the morning, and then time for breakfast, and then some sort of icebreaker and like intention setting. And then, we sort of have a whole way to build the templates that we give publicly, and then like use those to play on offsites. Even like ending each day on a high note, and then ending your entire offsite on a high note, so that if and when people are debating on an important issue or if things get heated, like there's a way to cool off and like enjoy each other's company, and then like ends the offsite on a bang, so that they think back to the experience fondly 2-3 months afterwards. So all these building blocks, even like one that might be overlooked is adding lots of flex time into the agenda, so that if you're running late on a session, like you're not ruining the rest of the agenda. Also, like people might get exhausted, so giving them the opportunity to have unstructured social time with each other. That's typically when some of the best conversations happen, is organically. But then also like let people take a nap or call home or go do a workout or something like that, or explore wherever you're traveling to. Maybe people don't have the opportunity to travel, and this is a cool experience for them. So it's a lot of building blocks. So just like automatic GitLab Offsite has done, if you try and template these experiences, it'll save you a lot of time, and it'll be easier to even like delegate this to team leaders or to other people planning an offsite at your company, because you just be like, here's the playbook, do it. Don't ask me to do it. I'm busy.
Totally. That's a lesson I've learned. Also, the point that you made about having flex time. My gosh. I've learned that lesson the hard way. You definitely want to have flex time. And I think that when you have social time, that's when flex time is extra important, because if things are going well, socializing is happening, people are connecting, they don't want to stop and you don't want them to stop. That's the whole reason why you're meeting in person.
Yeah.
And so you want to bake that in. That's such a good point. Jared, we have to wrap up with some questions about you as a human being,
Sure.
so that we know a little bit about yourself. I'm just going to throw them out. You just answer what first comes to the top of your brain. So the first one is, what is your favorite part of the day?
Probably the morning time. Not that I have a strict morning routine, but I have building blocks of a good morning. And I like getting a little run in. Love coffee. I have like 4 cups a day, probably. And just like getting into it.
What is something that makes you little kid happy? I guess besides coffee, now that we know that you love coffee.
I didn't drink coffee as a little kid. That'd be pretty dangerous. But I'm a big basketball fan. So I follow like the NBA religiously, probably waste way too much time on NBA.com and ESPN. But I'm a diehard Miami Heat fan and love checking in on the games and all the storylines. Like, I spend too much time on this. But played as a kid, and it's an outlet for me, I guess, ?
What book are you currently reading, or what audiobook are you listening to?
I'm finishing up a book called $100 Million Leads from Alex Hormozy, who's like one of the top internet marketer, internetpreneurs right now. Seems super cheesy and internet markety as a person, but like has some really good content. I don't know him personally, but learning a lot from that. And then I'm trying to look at like my desk. I was finishing up 5 Dysfunctions of a Team from Patrick Lencioni. At some point may want to have my team go through that with me, and then was also taking some elements of that and putting it into an agenda template that I published a couple days ago, which is an executive team retreat agenda template.
Nice. Well, this is the next one. This is not a normal rapid fire, but as a 3-time published author yourself, what would you say is the hardest part about writing a book?
The mistake I made with my first 2 books is having a non-commercially viable title. So my books, I'm biased, but I think have all been really good to read, but people do judge books by their cover. And so like my first book was called 2 Billion Under 20, How Millennials Are Breaking Down Age Barriers and Changing the World. And like 2 Billion Under 20 is cute, slash creative, if you consider that there's 2 billion people in the world at or under 20 years old and like try to inspire the generation, but like no one knows what that means. And then I did it again with 3 billion under 30. So my third book I called Networking. It is about networking. So, I don't know if that's the world's best title either, but like definitely spend a lot of time thinking about your title and your cover if you're going to write a book. And then with networking, I decided to write that book because I had a decade of podcast interviews, articles, online courses I'd attempted to create around networking and relationship building. I was like, oh, it'll be easy to have it all transcribed and put into a book. But then I wanted to write a book that people would read. And like, you have to not only have good content, but you have to make it entertaining, like back to the sort of speaker thing. And so adding back in anecdotes to bring the book to life, and then adding in interviews and ideas from other networking and relationship building experts. There's like all these layers that I added in that hopefully made it a good content to like good book. And so I think that's something I wasn't thinking about beforehand.
I just took a bunch of tips away from myself, put them in my back pocket. What is the best purchase you've made under $50?
My back hurts right now, so I got like tennis balls that I'm using as sort of like to like rub my feet on. It's like when you're in pain,
those are great.
that could be a nice adjustment before you get the adjustment with the chiropractor. $50. I mean, I run through headphones, so maybe I should just spend more than $50 and get like great headphones. But I'll spend money 3 or 4 times a year on like $15 to $20 headphones. I'm sure I have better answers. One that's more practical is like the cable that you use to charge your phone. I have like 8-foot long, cables. And so I have my little cube.
Great one.
Yeah, I have my little cube. And then I have, I don't have any around me, but I have the cube that you have. And then I have like these 8-foot long cables. And so, and I'll use them to travel and whatever. So that's amazing to just like be able to charge a phone and have it in bed, or like go to a hotel and be able to just survive and thrive. Yeah.
Totally. That's reminding me what I need to get. What's the most important lesson you've learned so far in your life?
Yeah, things are hard ones. I would maybe go with like most things are figure outable, and like there's not there's very few like truly irreversible decisions. And so I have definitely, and that brings with it a lot of humility and also a lot of confidence. So like for running a company, it's like you just make the most educated guess you can about a certain direction to bring the business. But like you can't always change the OKRs. You can change the business name. You can change like most everything about the business, including all the employees. You could replace yourself if you wanted to. And so I don't know if we can curse on this show, but I can and give you my new favorite saying, like a bonus.
Go for it.
I've been jokingly saying lately that I don't know shit about fuck, and I don't know fuck about shit. So like literally we're all figuring it out, which is also cool because it's confidence inspiring that no one else knows what they're doing. And so why can't you be the one to build that company or run that marathon or do whatever you want? So I've been able to take on some cool adventures, like starting new hobbies. I got into like jujitsu a year ago, which is part of why my back hurts, but that's been a lot of fun. And I didn't grow up thinking I would do that. I've run ultra marathons. I've, started businesses, like did TED Talks, blah, blah, blah. But like, those are all things that like other people have done, and like, you can do it too. And like, it also is humbling because even if things are going amazingly well, like something tragic, challenging can just be on the other side of that. Like I'm 28 at the time of recording. I've been both married and divorced. Like I didn't expect to get divorced when I got married, but like that happened, and then you deal with it. And so, yeah, whatever I said 2 minutes ago, I'll stand by it.
That's so good. Sometimes you just have to take that leap and just know that you can just try it, and you might fail at it, but that's okay.
And very few things are irreversible. That's what I said that I
The last question here for the rapid fire questions is, Jared, what do you want to be when you grow up?
I think I'm doing it. Like entrepreneur. And I don't think I'm going to stop anytime soon. Like I think all the personal and professional challenges I've had in, my early years, and like they're relative, like everyone has, like I would gladly take my life back if like everyone put their cards on the table and challenges and whatever. And like, I would pick up my problems again and, run with those. But, for whatever challenges we've had, I love running a business. And I think it'll just make me a more savage entrepreneur when I'm in my 50s and 60s. And so I definitely am doing what I want to be when I grow up. And I'm just really excited to see where I can take this current business and then what lessons I'll take to the next business as an operator. See what I did there? And
I saw it.
Yeah. And then trying to figure out the hobbies on the side, like keep doing random cool things that have interest to me so that I'm not so one-dimensional. And I want to be able to look back on my life and have a cool life resume that includes writing lots of books, I guess, and doing these ultra marathons. And maybe one day I'll get a black belt in jiu-jitsu. And like, I've like joked with friends about like learning music production and not just DJing, but actually like making beats. Like, who knows? Maybe I'll do that in like 5-10 years. Like, I have no idea. But everything's figure outable, I guess. Question mark.
Everything is figure outable. Now, before we officially wrap up, if people are hearing what you're talking about, they're resonating, everything you're saying is resonating with them, where can they find you? Where would you like to point them?
Yeah, you can email me, jared@offsite.com. If you have interest in working with us, happy to give you a 10% discount on your first contract with Offsite. Just tell us that Ariana sent you or Secret Ops sent you. You can just go to offsite.com for that. We also have free to use software in that marketplace. So you can work with us for end-to-end offsite planning, or you can use the marketplace like you would use Airbnb, and happy to have you there either way.
Amazing. Jared, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this topic that I feel like goes under the radar, but is so, so important, especially now in today's world. Just thank you. I really appreciate your knowledge and your expertise and your humor.
Thanks for the rapid fire questions. I have me questioning every aspect of my life now.
Yes. I even let you go on some of the harder ones, but we'll come back to them for part two. Part two, we'll do the next round. Of course, listeners, thank you so much for listening to Secret Ops. Please remember to follow us wherever you find your podcasts. We're also on YouTube now. And check us out at secret-ops.com. We'll see you next time.